So I'm recording now, and let me see if I share screen just for a second, if it did what I wanted it to do. That's not what I wanted it to do for a second, but we'll see what happens. All right, so how's everybody? We're here, we're ready to go. Last time we were here, a couple of things I just wanted to remind everybody, because repetition is the mother of skill. A lot of times people say, especially in this day and age of rapid fire learning that you guys are in, you're in an exciting time to be. You have rapid fire learning. And move that down because this is the screen that everybody's going to see, not the one that I have. Rapid fire learning, this is being recorded. Rapid fire learning, everything that you guys are wanting to see. A lot of times people make a mistake for rapidity as to learning the depth of what needs to be learned. Okay, so why did I do the mirroring? I have my book right here, Never Split the Difference, right? And you can see it's kind of used. I know probably some of you haven't really opened it up that much just to answer the questions, but if you look at my book, you can see a lot of handwritten notes in the margins. I can't return this book for anything. But the reason why I want you guys to know this mirroring thing is that because if you get this right, you will be 25, 30% better negotiator than anybody you will ever meet. That means, I don't care if they went to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, I know the process that they have. I'm going to be sending you those processes through video. You're going to see Harvard's model. I'm going to try to get you the Stanford's model. And I want you to know why it's so important, what we've learned here so far about mirror and matching. Okay? Does anyone have any questions about that? And I had two things I wanted to read from the book. Just to point this is, mirrors work. Why do they work like magic? Why do you think? Why do mirrors work like magic? Yes.
Because mirrors are able to help you see your reflection on what you are trying to accomplish, what you're trying to influence that person of.
Okay, that's true. Anybody else? Well, I'm going to tell you one of the key points of mirroring is this. Because people want to see themselves. Think about that. It's really powerful. People like to see themselves. They get a certain feeling of comfort. We like to be around people who are like us. That's why mirroring works. People like to be around people who are like us. So the power of mirroring is the person, when you speak to that person, feels like you're like them. You're already a friend. That's very important. Second major point, familiarity brings comfort and security. So when you mirror someone else, when you mirror another human being, you're making that person feel comfort and security. And if we remember what I discussed in one of the lectures, I talked about the 6 human needs. And the first human need was what?
Certainty.
Certainty. And connected to certainty is comfort and security. Does everyone understand that? So when you mirror people properly, you're making them see themselves in you, and you're making them feel that they are in comfort and security. I'm looking at my notes because I had them in the book. And the last thing is, we can trigger those feelings we have in another person. So that's what your colleague Nicholas was suggesting. But what I want you to know is, in order for you to really take advantage of triggering the feelings in another person, you should go, I said first or second? Do you remember?
First.
Go first. I want that to be your motto, because if you go first, a lot of times negotiators say, let's wait to get the response. But I'm going to be telling you, you're negotiating from the moment you pick up the phone. It's not when the person just gives you the offer or responds to your offer. It's when you go first, is meaning you take the risk of building rapport with the other human being first. All right. And let me just show you something quickly. I'm going to see a couple of things this time a little differently. I really appreciate each and every one of you coming on this earlier time. I'm videotaping this so that some of your colleagues who may be working, may be doing other things, may have synchronistic classes. They can't come now. I understand all that. So I don't take it, I don't take it personally. I want people to get this information though. So let's watch this first video. As you've seen, some videos a lot of times I try to make them interesting. So let's share screen. Let's go here quickly. And you guys are seeing something, but that's not what I want you to see. That's for my next meeting. Watch this. And tell me if you can hear it.
Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest
responsibility
is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So let's stop that. Why do you think I showed you that? Yes, Nicholas.
Just trying to get like a mirroring like effect, like how bringing soldiers like into the country, it's like a very dangerous like situation.
So what they're doing is they're actually using the power of repetition and mirroring to influence public opinion. And what I hope you all noticed was that those were separate and different television stations. They weren't all the same news stations. They seem to be competing, don't they? All around the country. But they're all saying the same exact thing. And so one of the reasons why we're taking this negotiation class, remember I showed you the guy taking the wallet. I showed you that again. I showed you he's using mirror and matching techniques. And one person asked, how can I protect myself? Do you remember that? One of our colleagues asked, how can I protect myself? Right? That's a fair question. How can we protect ourselves? First of all, we have to be what? Aware that we can be taken advantage of. Does that make sense? We
Yes.
have to be aware that we can be taken advantage. So I wanted to show you that video about needing to be able to stand guard at the gate of your mind and to understand the power of repetition and mirroring to influence your emotions. So we need to know how to influence other people. This part of this course is to show you how you're influenced. And I do a lot of different types of deals outside of the college. And one deal I'm working on right now, I'm not going to exaggerate, it could potentially be worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to the company. Hundreds and hundreds of millions. I'm not joking. Did I say hundreds? I'll say it one more time, hundreds. But one of the key things that I had to get people to understand who I'm helping to represent is don't have the mindset that you can't or you don't deserve, because that's one of the mindsets that they subtly program people to do. And then when they went out and they said, oh, we're not gonna be able to do this. And I told them, I said, hey, I'll be honest with you. I'll tell them what I told the valuation. I said, it could be 1.2 billion. I told them something like that. And they said, oh, you're crazy. At the most we could be is worth, if we got crazy, we'd be 100 million. I said, okay. They went out to outside evaluators and they listened to what they said. And they said, whatever you do, don't do what you're thinking. They agreed with me. They basically said, don't do what you're thinking. So why am I telling you that? It's important not to negotiate against yourself. You have to know your no's. We just got out of mirroring. I want to show you the power. So this is a very short class, but it's going to hopefully be an illuminating class. So we're going to see a video now on going first. You've heard me talk about it. So what? So what? What is the power of being? Let me ask you a question. Who do you think who gets the most out of life in general? Givers, takers, or matchers? That means if you say givers, hey, I'll give to you. A person says, take, I'll take. Give me. Or matchers, you do for me, I do for you. Organized crime relationships. We get into relationships like that, right? I'm not doing anything until they do for me, right? We do that. That's a negotiation. We don't think of it. Everything's a negotiation. I said that at the beginning. Are you going first? Are you an intelligent giver? Who do you think ends up on top? The taker? I get what I can get. I got mine, you get yours, baby. Who do you think ends up on the top? Anybody? Yes, you can say, Nicholas. Who do you think?
The matchers always end up on top because they're the ones who are doing like both, like either like go along with that, and the takers are always in the bottom, and the givers are like in the middle somewhere.
Okay, so Nicholas's view is the matchers, those who match. Those who match will end up on top. The givers you said in the middle, and the takers at the bottom. Anybody else have any different view? Anybody want to say? Or you can type it in, it doesn't matter. Anybody? What do you think? Who's at the top? Givers, takers, or matchers?
Well, I do agree for the most part with Nicholas.
Okay.
But at the same time, I am a pessimist. So, every man for himself is something.
Every man
I
for
do
himself,
believe
every
too.
person, every human being for themselves. I've got mine, you get yours. Matches, I've got another matcher. Anybody else? Matcher, giver, taker. Anybody? Candlestick maker. That's a little rhyme. I'm free to become a rapper. So, right. Who else believes it? So we got most of you saying matchers.
I think that takers might.
Takers.
Yeah, because I think
No.
a lot of
I got mine. Let me give you an example of a taker. I used to be a professional actor. I'm still available for roles as a professional actor. And one of the things I used to go to the dermatologist. I used to go to a dermatologist, one of the top dermatologists in the city. And one time I used to pay, I'm not exaggerating, maybe $300 a month when I was doing that. Because I wanted my skin to look flawless, right? And one day I got a call from his nurse practitioner. And they said, Mr. Lynch, I know you're coming in a week, but you failed to pay a dime. Can you put the dime in an envelope and send it to us? And I said, you're crazy. I'm not. And I'll see you on Tuesday and give you the dime with the rest of my, exactly, the stamp costs more. That's what I thought, right? Don't get me started. I'll call him out right here. I'll call him out on the video. He's retired, hopefully so. But that's an example of a taker. Do you think he was a great dermatologist? Do you think that I was recommending him to my friends after he did that? No, I was not. See, taking is good if you're going to be a one-off, right? If I'm going to rob you, I'm out of here, bro. Yeah, real, I'm out, I'm gone. One time, you get to cheat people one time, and they're out. But the research shows, as Maria said, she's a pessimist, right? There's reason for optimism. And the reason for optimism is that the research shows across the board, and I'm going to have us see the video now, people who are givers, who are intelligent givers, always, not sometimes, always end up at the top. And let me tell you why. What happens when I match? If I'm in a relationship, I say, well, wait for you. I'm not going to tell you if you love me until you say you love me. Well, they say, I'm not going to tell you I love you until you love me. Well, I'm not going first, you go first. I'm not going first, you go first. I'm not going to go. Guess what they never say? They never say to each other what? They love each other. They're still waiting sometimes before the other person they feel in harmony or rapport with. That's the problem with being a matcher. You can match yourself right out of a wonderful situation. So let's see. So does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Let's see another professor, one of the top professors in the country, talk about it for about 10 minutes. Let's watch that for a second. Share screen. Let's go here. And let's not see this big thing. I don't know how that happened. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's get rid of this one. And here we go. Let's watch this one.
So I want you to look around the room for a minute and try to find the most paranoid person here. And then I want you to point at that person for me. Okay, don't actually do it. But as an organizational psychologist, I spend a lot of time in workplaces, and I find paranoia everywhere. Paranoia is caused by people that I call takers. Takers are self-serving in their interactions. It's all about what can you do for me. The opposite is a giver. It's somebody who approaches most interactions by asking, what can I do for you? And I wanted to give you a chance to think about your own style. We all have moments of giving and taking. Your style is just how you treat most of the people most of the time, your default. So I have a short test that you can take to figure out if you're more of a giver or a taker, and you can take it right now. This is the only thing I will say today that has no data behind it, but I am convinced the longer it takes you to laugh at this cartoon, the more worried we should be that you're a taker. Of course, not all takers are narcissists. Some are just givers who got burned one too many times. And then there's another kind of taker that we won't be addressing today, and that's called a psychopath. I was curious, though, about how common these extremes are, and so I surveyed over 30,000 people across industries around the world's cultures. And I found that most people are right in the middle between giving and taking. They choose this third style called matching. If you're a matcher, you try to keep an even balance of give and take, quid pro quo. I'll do something for you if you do something for me. And that seems like a safe way to live your life. But is it the most effective and productive way to live your life? The answer to that question is a very definitive maybe. Now, I studied dozens of organizations, thousands of people. I had engineers measuring their productivity. I looked at medical students' grades, even salespeople's revenue. And unexpectedly, the worst performers in each of these jobs were the givers. The engineers who got the least work done were the ones who did more favors than they got back. They were so busy doing other people's jobs, they literally ran out of time and energy to get their own work completed. In medical school, the lowest grades belong to the students who agree most strongly with statements like, I love helping others, which suggests the doctor you ought to trust is the one who came to med school with no desire to help anybody. And then in sales, too, the lowest revenue accrued to the most generous salespeople. And I actually reached out to one of those salespeople who had a very high giver score, and I asked him, why do you suck at your job? I didn't ask it that way, but what's the cost of generosity in sales? And he said, well, I just care so deeply about my customers that I would never sell them one of our crappy products. So just out of curiosity, how many of you self-identify more as givers than takers or matchers? Raise your hands. Okay, would have been more before we talked about these data. But actually, it turns out there's a twist here, because givers are often sacrificing themselves, but they make their organizations better. We have a huge body of evidence, many, many studies, looking at the frequency of giving behavior that exists in a team or an organization. And the more often people are helping and sharing their knowledge and providing mentoring, the better organizations do on every metric we can measure. Higher profits, customer satisfaction, employee retention, even lower operating expenses. So givers spend a lot of time trying to help other people and improve the team, and then unfortunately they suffer along the way. And I want to talk about what it takes to build cultures where givers actually get to succeed. So I wondered then, if givers are the worst performers, who are the best performers? And let me start with the good news. It's not the takers. Takers tend to rise quickly, but also fall quickly in most jobs. And they fall at the hands of matchers. If you're a matcher, you believe in an eye for an eye, a just world. And so when you meet a taker, you feel like it's your mission in life to just punish the hell out of that person. And that way justice gets served. Well, most people are matchers, and that means if you're a taker, it tends to catch up with you eventually. What goes around will come around. And so the logical conclusion is it must be the matchers who are the best performers. But they're not. In every job, in every organization I've ever studied, the best results belong to the givers again. So take a look at some data that I gathered from hundreds of salespeople tracking their revenue. What you can see is that the givers go to both extremes. They make up the majority of the people who bring in the lowest revenue, but also the highest revenue. And the same patterns were true for engineers' productivity and medical students' grades. Givers are overrepresented at the bottom and at the top of every success metric that I can track. Which raises the question, how do we create a world where more of these givers get to excel? And I want to talk about how to do that, not just in businesses, but also in nonprofits, schools, even governments. Are you ready? All right, I was going to do it anyway, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. The first thing that's really critical is to recognize that givers are your most valuable people, but if they're not careful, they burn out. So you have to protect the givers in your midst. And I learned a great lesson about this from Fortune's Best Networker. It's the guy, not the cat. His name is Adam Rifkin. He's a very successful serial entrepreneur who spends a huge amount of his time helping other people. And his secret weapon is the 5-minute favor. Adam said, look, you don't have to be Mother Teresa or Gandhi to be a giver. You just have to find small ways to add large value to other people's lives. And that could be as simple as making an introduction between two people who could benefit from knowing each other. It could be sharing your knowledge or giving a little bit of feedback. Or it might be even something as basic as saying, you know, I'm going to try to figure out if I can recognize somebody whose work who has gone unnoticed. And those 5-minute favors are really critical to helping givers set boundaries and protect themselves. And the second thing that matters, if you want to build a culture where givers succeed, is you actually need a culture where help seeking is the norm, where people ask a lot. This may hit a little too close to home for some of you. What you see with successful givers is they recognize that it's okay to be a receiver too. And if you run an organization, we can actually make this easier. We can make it easier for people to ask for help. A couple of colleagues and I studied hospitals, and we found that on certain floors, nurses did a lot of help seeking, and on other floors, they did very little of it. And the factor that stood out on the floors where help seeking was common, where it was the norm, was there was just one nurse whose sole job it was to help other nurses on the unit. And when that role was available, nurses said, oh, it's not embarrassing, it's not vulnerable to ask for help, it's actually encouraged. Now, help seeking isn't important just for protecting the success and the well-being of givers. It's also critical to getting more people to act like givers. Because the data say that somewhere between 75 and 90% of all giving in organizations starts with a request. But a lot of people don't ask. They don't want to look incompetent, they don't know where to turn, they don't want to burden others. And yet, if nobody ever asked for help, you have a lot of frustrated givers in your organization who would love to step up and contribute if they only knew who could benefit and how. But I think the most important thing, if you want to build a culture of successful givers, is to be thoughtful about who you let onto your team. I figured you want a culture of productive generosity, you should hire a bunch of givers. But I was surprised to discover, actually, that that was not right. That the negative impact of a taker on a culture is usually double to triple the positive impact of a giver. Think about it this way. One bad apple can spoil a barrel, but one good egg just does not make a dozen. I don't know what that means, but I hope you do. No, let even one taker into a team, and you will see that the givers will stop helping. They'll say, I'm surrounded by a bunch of snakes and sharks, why should I contribute? Whereas if you let one giver into a team, you don't get an explosion of generosity. More often, people are like, great, that person can do all our work. So effective hiring and screening and team building is not about bringing in the givers. It's about weeding out the takers. And if you can do that well, you will be left with givers and matchers. The givers will be generous because they don't have to worry about the consequences. And the beauty of the matchers is that they follow the norm. So how do you catch a taker before it's too late? We're actually pretty bad at figuring out who's a taker, especially on first impressions. And there's a personality trait that throws us off. It's called agreeableness, one of the major dimensions of personality across cultures. Agreeable people are warm and friendly, they're nice, they're polite. You find a lot of them in Canada, where there was actually a national contest to come up with a new Canadian slogan and fill in the blank as Canadian as, and I thought the winning entry was going to be as Canadian as maple syrup or ice hockey. But no, Canadians voted for their new national slogan to be, I kid you not, as Canadian as possible under the circumstances. Now, for those of you who are highly agreeable or maybe slightly Canadian, you get this right away. How could I ever say I'm any one thing when I'm constantly adapting to try to please other people? Disagreeable people do less of it. They're more critical, skeptical, challenging, and far more likely than their peers to go to law school. That's not a joke, that's actually an empirical fact. So I always assumed that agreeable people were givers and disagreeable people were takers. But then I gathered the data and I was stunned to find no correlation between those traits. Because it turns out that agreeableness, disagreeableness is your outer veneer. How pleasant is it to interact with you? Whereas giving and taking are more of your inner motives. What are your values? What are your intentions toward others? So if you really want to judge people accurately, you have to get to the moment that every consultant in the room is waiting for and draw a 2x2. The agreeable givers are easy to spot. They say yes to everything. The disagreeable takers are also recognized quickly, although you might call them by a slightly different name. We forget about the other two combinations. There are disagreeable givers in our organizations. They're people who are gruff and tough on the surface, but underneath have others' best interests at heart. Or as an engineer put it, oh, disagreeable givers, like somebody with a bad user interface, but a great operating system. If that helps you. Disagreeable givers are the most undervalued people in our organizations because they're the ones who give the critical feedback that no one wants to hear, but everyone needs to hear. We need to do a much better job valuing these people as opposed to writing them off early and saying, kind of prickly, must be a selfish taker. The other combination we forget about is the deadly one, the agreeable taker, also known as the faker. This is the person who's nice to your face and then will stab you right in the back. And my favorite way to catch these people in the interview process is to ask the question, can you give me the names of 4 people whose careers you have fundamentally improved? And the takers will give you 4 names, and they will all be more influential than them. Because takers are great at kissing up and then kicking down. Givers are more likely to name people who are below them in a hierarchy, who don't have as much power, who can do them no good. And let's face it, you all know you can learn a lot about character by watching how someone treats their restaurant server or their Uber driver. So if we do all this well, if we can weed takers out of organizations, if we can make it safe to ask for help, if we can protect givers from burnout, and make it okay for them to be ambitious in pursuing their own goals, as well as trying to help other people, we can actually change the way that people define success. Instead of saying it's all about winning a competition, people will realize success is really more about contribution. I believe that the most meaningful way to succeed is to help other people succeed. And if we can spread that belief, we can actually turn paranoia upside down. There's a name for that. It's called pronoia. Pronoia is the delusional belief that other people are plotting your well-being. That they're going around behind your back and saying exceptionally glowing things about you. And the great thing about a culture of givers is that's not a delusion, it's reality. Look, I want to live in a world where givers succeed, and I hope you will help me create that world. Thank you.
I don't have the right.
All right, let's stop that. That's scaring people. So what'd you guys think? What'd you guys think about that? Interesting?
I thought it was.
Have you ever thought about, so why am I doing this? We're in the negotiation class. Why am I giving you this piece of information? Because when you negotiate, you want to be able to be an intelligent giver because you automatically begin to create relationships that are life affirming and that will have staying power going forward. Make sense, everybody?
Yes.
So that's one of the things that's not in the book and Never Split the Difference, but I think it's an important concept to have. Does anybody else have anything to say? Because I'm gonna show something else. We're gonna go into the next thing, which is tied to what we're learning in Never Split the Difference and the power of no. Do you think, now remember, he was talking about givers, takers, and matchers. If you're a giver, should you just say, I'll give, I'll give, I'll give, I'll give, I'll give, I'll give? Or should you be an intelligent giver?
Intelligent giver is the best way to approach this.
Absolutely. Does anyone else think differently? It's very important to understand the difference. We need to be intelligent givers. And when we don't know our no's, we can't act intelligently. if you're saying you're going to date someone and you say you date everybody that wants to date you, you might have 50,000 people you're dating. Right? You say that's a problem I'll take, right? Right. But if that's the case, then your yes has no meaning. Yes, sir.
Also, like whenever you want to be like an intelligent thinker, you also have to define the significance of what people are going to say, because not everybody's going to like agree with what you are trying to do. You're just trying to like you want to make sure that you have the significant proper important techniques that you will have to keep in mind. So you will have to when you approach other people, in order to have a smart, you'll get your yeses and a lot of no's.
And here's the key point that you're saying. In order for me to know what's significant to you, do I know where you were born?
No.
Do I know who you've ever dated? So the only way I can find those things out is to do what?
Ask them.
I have to really be concerned about the questions I'm asking. And if I'm really concerned, then I'm going to get a different response than if I'm just running through it. So when you say that, you're right. But the key thing to ask is, how can I listen to the other person so I can elicit information from them that's meaningful to them? So you don't discover your nose in an instant. So if I go, let's go to the bar and drink 50 bottles of vodka, you got to know before you go in the bar that if you don't drink, you don't go and wait until the bar and then say, well, I'll just drink the first 5 bottles and see what happens. You've got to be able to say no before you go into the bar. If you're going to go in the bar, you have the seltzer, whatever you're going to do. You got to know your nose before. Knowing yourself is important. And that's why one of the things we're going to talk about is storytelling. I'm going to show you now, you guys can keep seeing, what is the significance when people don't know their nose? What will they do, and what can the society or people get them to do? Does this make sense to everybody? Do you see where we're going?
Yeah.
All right, let's see that now for a second. Let's go to the video. Let's go to the video. We've done that one already, and we're going to, this is a famous Milgram experiment, and we'll watch that for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to see the last one, which is truly shocking.
From the early 60s to the early 70s, a group of social scientists conducted a series of experiments examining the nature of human behavior and its relationship to social conventions and situations.
In this setting, I allow things to be done to me that I wouldn't allow in any other context. The dentist is about to put an electric drill into my mouth. In this setting, I willingly expose my throat to a man with a razor blade.
Stanley Milgram, one of the most influential social psychologists of the time, was particularly fascinated with the dangers of group behavior and blind obedience to authority.
What is there in human nature that allows an individual to act without any restraints whatsoever, so that he can act inhumanely, harshly, severely, and in no way limited by feelings of compassion or conscience? These are questions.
But he might be dead in there. The experiment requires that you continue teaching. 330 volts.
The experiments that Milgram and others conducted were controversial, and for ethical reasons may never be conducted again. Yet the results of those experiments remain groundbreaking, profoundly revealing about the tensions between the individual and society, and increasingly relevant to contemporary life. In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an event that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable. How the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment.
What inspired Milgram, I would say there were a number of factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted, as he wrote to one friend, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment that he could think of.
Would you roll up your right sleeve, please? This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. Do you have any questions now before we go into the next room?
About 2 years ago, I was in the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you are seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts, and you increase the shock 1 step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105. Hard hit. Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary. What do you mean, as far as is necessary?
Milgram was very much aware that obedience is a necessary ingredient for society to function. But he focused on the darker side of obedience.
Incorrect. 150 volts. Sad face.
Wait a minute. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now.
It's absolutely essential that you continue. You got no other choice, teacher.
Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being harmed.
Now, this man makes disobedience seem a very rational and simple deed. Now, other subjects respond quite differently to the experimenter's authority.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim. You don't know. Please continue.
Some psychologists were troubled by the ethics of it. Many, if not most subjects, found it a highly stressful, conflicted experience. People are stammering, stuttering, laughing hysterically, inappropriately.
150 volts.
Experimenter. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me now. Get me out of here, please. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Clearly, when we say people went to the top of the shock board, it wasn't like they were going blithely, sadistically. People went stop and go, stop and go. They were in a state of conflict, which created a tremendous amount of stress. So that was the main critique.
This will be at 3:30.
As his voice began to show increasing frustration, so did I. And I was really in a state of real conflict and agitation. One of Stanley Milgram's basic contributions was that you don't ask people what they would do given this hypothetical situation. You put them in the situation.
Wrong. I'm up to 180 volts.
Please continue, teacher.
180 volts.
I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man there.
According to Milgram, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
Next one, slow.
He didn't hold any gun to anybody's head. Just the fact that he conveyed a sense of authority. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shock board.
450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please. The 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we
But
must...
he might be dead in there.
Milgram made the point, I think, very effectively, that the Nazis weren't all a bunch of psychopaths at Belsen and Dachau.
Let's stop there. What do you think? Do you think it's important? Yes, yes. Yes, yes, Maria.
Thank you. So I remember watching this a few semesters ago somewhere, and one of the things that we were discussing was that people will obey or say yes as long as somebody else takes responsibility for any negative consequences.
Yes, very important. So here's what we started this particular section off, and you're going to read Never Split the Difference, because we have to know our what?
Our nose.
Our nose. After the man started screaming, said, I want to stop. Do we have the courage to say, I don't care what everybody else says. We're not going to cause harm because I'm going what? Second or first?
First.
First. That's why going first is so powerful. You have to maintain your shape. Because there will be societal influences that will negotiate with you to change your position against things that are part of your humanity and who you are. Does that make sense? Very important. So you just think, oh, I know I need some tricks. No, it's not tricks. Because if you know your no, I don't care what the person says, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to dehumanize you or someone else. Very important. Any questions about it? Anybody else want to say anything about what we just saw? We're going to see something else in a Martin context. Some of you may have seen it, but in a Martin context, that's a Milgram experiment. But I want to show you in a different context, the power of no. Anybody else have anything? Let's watch one more. Let's watch one more. Screen share. Drop that down. That. Let's watch this one. This is a very, Zimbardo is another very famous social psychologist.
Sure, in that situation. That's not the conclusion of Stanley Milgram or Phil Zimbardo based on our research. That's the conclusion of an assistant manager in McDonald's in Kentucky, Donna Summers, who was trapped in what has come to be known as an authority hoax. A stranger calls up pretending to be a police officer, saying that one of the employees has stolen something, has contraband, and that what she has to do is bring the woman to the security room in the back, strip her naked and search for this contraband. It sounds like it's drugs or something. And then at that point, the guy on the phone, who she believes is a police officer, begins to tell her to do more and more outrageous things. Finally, he asks her to bring in a male to take care of the situation because she's got to go back to work. And this authority hoax guy, this guy pretending to be a police chief, tells this man to do something which is horrendous. It would be, we could say, this is what's wrong with this guy, what's wrong with this woman, if it didn't happen in over 60 other fast food establishments throughout the country. So here is the power of authority to get good people to do bad things, not in an experiment, but in everyday life throughout the United States.
A series of strange events recently confirmed Milgram's theories about obedience. Targeting fast food restaurants across the country, A con man telephoned restaurant managers and convinced them to strip search and sometimes sexually abuse their employees. The mystery is not in the con man, but in the victims. Why would they obey?
This person was so convincing, people saw him as a legitimate authority. I think we have probably the closest thing that we have to Milgram experiment today in these strip searches.
The most famous of these incidents took place at a McDonald's in Mount Washington, Kentucky.
There was a videotape security camera had filmed. We didn't hear what the instructions were, but due to the actions that were had taken place, what the victim was doing in the video and stuff, it was pretty evident what each instruction was.
An anonymous caller pretending to be a police officer told the assistant manager that an employee had stolen some money.
He said, "I'm Officer Scott," and he said, "I'm with the police department. I'm investigating a complaint." It went directly from a theft into a drug thing. So I was asked to search her clothing. You know, he would tell me, take her shoes, click them, take her shirt, shake it out. I know how it seems to people, but you weren't on the phone with him. The man has convinced 70 to 100 other places the very same thing. He's very good at what he does. Very good. He sounded like a police officer. And I'm thinking, okay, you know, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
He was getting some kind of satisfaction by being an authoritative figure and telling people what to do, and then realizing by the phone conversation that they were actually doing what he said.
He's telling me that I needed to get someone to sit with her while he goes and gets somebody to come in to pick her up.
The caller then asked the manager if she was married or had a boyfriend. She said that she had a fiance. Then the caller asked if she could have her fiance come to the restaurant and assist her with the strip search of the victim.
He says, well, why don't you have him come up and sit there? I mean, you can trust him. So called Wes, my fiance, we were going to get married, and asked him if he would come up.
The manager goes about doing her duties of running the restaurant and leaves the fiance there in the office, and then the caller starts giving instructions over the phone of things that he wants the victim to do and what he wants the fiance to tell her to do. Have her remove her apron and instruct her to do jumping jacks and jog in place and several more things. She was still in high school. The kind of person she was actually graduating the top 10 in her class. And she was scared of being in trouble with the police, so she sort of just went along and did whatever the fiance told her to do because she didn't want to be in trouble for anything.
During all this time, I'm working. I'm running the floor, I'm getting change, and then when I would walk into the office to get the change or whatever I had to get, Wes would be sitting where he was when I left, and she was sitting where she was, and no one said anything.
After over 2.5 hours, Summer's fiancé, Walter Nix, did something that was unthinkable. Complying with the instructions of the caller, he ordered the employee to perform a sexual act.
There's no way that I could take away from what happened to her. A lot of people, you know, look at you and go, well, you're a nut, you should be strung up. I've had it even said to me. But it's really hard because you weren't there.
The Milgram study showed us that most people would do that. If you structure the environment such that, you know, you provide all the authority and you know, the commands, just anybody might do this.
But I do think this sounds worse.
You think this is worse than what Milgram did?
With the Milgram, there was somebody like sitting right there and instructing them. If they hesitated, they could turn, and then somebody could encourage them, and they could sort of maybe psychologically leave that responsibility on that other person. But in this case, the police officer's on the phone. He's not standing there.
Exactly. It's a very good point.
You know, you look back on it and you say, I wouldn't have done it. But unless you're put in that situation at that time, how do you know what you would do? You don't. You don't.
Over 60 other people did exactly as Donna Summers did. Why is it so easy for us to obey orders even when we know they are wrong? Why are we willing to inflict pain on others if someone else takes responsibility?
There's nothing more difficult for people to violate a social structure which all participants have initially accepted. It reminds me of a situation that once occurred in...
Okay, we're gonna stop there. We're gonna stop there because we're running out of time. But what do you guys think? Do you see the power of saying you must say no? Yes, Nicholas.
I see there is like a way to say no in this type of situation, but whenever there's like something else at stake, you're sacrificing something else for the other person. And what's worse, if a person doesn't like say anything, and like when you're doing like a strip search and everything, and like not putting up the responsibility, that's like, I think that's wrong. I mean, it's really wrong, but it's really right to like obey the orders in order to like save somebody else's life, rather than rather than risk the other person's life in order, and like by saying no and stuff like that, because you're able to try to trick them and like you're following their orders. It's basically like how mirroring and basically how like the power of like saying no comes into this type of situation.
Yeah, it's very important. But the key point that you have to think about here is for everybody, I want you to, because this is it, we're finished, and I want you guys to have a great break. But the main thing I hope you got out of this is there's nothing wrong with no. You have to know your no's in your life. You have to know your no's in such a way so that you can be able to provide your safety for your family and yourself. So when Nicholas points that out, he says, you don't want to ever get wrapped up in what everybody else is doing. At the end of the day, you have to make sure everybody's safe, but you also have to make sure that it aligns with your deepest values, whatever they may be. You don't want to have do something because someone told you to do it. Or negotiating. Remember, we talked about why am I saying this? Why, last 2 minutes, why am I telling you this? Because we can learn a lot of different approaches to negotiation. But one of the worst things you can do in negotiation is to try and use things to influence people to take advantage of them. Because the first person who's harmed in the negotiation or influencing position is yourself. You begin to erode your vision of who you are and who you want to be. You erode your possibilities. So don't ever give away your humanity. You must know your no's. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
All right. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming early. Have a beautiful break. I'll be sending out some things out. You'll be seeing everything will be caught up. I've reviewed most of your work at least once, going to read it again twice, and then we're ready to go. All right? All right, everybody. Please be well and be safe. Thank you. And you take care as well. And thank you for your kindness. You can see I'm feeling a lot better than I was when I was just hanging in there. All right?
That's good news. That's the most important thing, the significance, making sure that you're staying safe no matter what.
Yes. All right. Take care, everybody. All right. Bye now.